This is When Science Speaks, a new web series profiling innovative and interesting people working in science and technical fields, from academia to industry to the nonprofit world. We explore how to be a powerhouse advocate for science and your research, how to advance your career in meaningful ways that make you happy, and how to push back on the ongoing assault on science and other related issues of interest happening in the world.
Well, hey everyone, it's Mark Bayer, and welcome to this episode of When Science Speaks. This episode is brought to you by Bayer Strategic Consulting in Washington, D.C., which helps scientists and engineers get funding, gain influence, and build strategic relationships with the stakeholders who matter most in their professional lives. It is such a great pleasure to have David Rosen on the show today. David is currently the CEO of Acrelic Group, an advisor and mentor at Signal Lake, which is a VC firm, also at TechLaunch, which is an accelerator, and several tech hardware and software companies. He is a manager, an advisor, a leader, and an executive. He's had leading roles in more than 40 successful M&A transactions ranging from $500,000 to $2.5 billion, personally involved in 6 exits. David's also been a CEO, managing director of 3 businesses and 6 board and board advisor positions. He's really been a leader in all these different roles throughout his career. And it is just wonderful that David has joined us today on the show. David, as we get started, I would love for you to share with listeners your interesting 4 pillars of leadership approach that you have developed.
The first pillar is understanding and being intimate with the customers and understanding what their needs are, what their demand issues are, what their goals are, what their problems are, and where does your product or service fit in those customers' needs, and which segments of the market are you playing in, and how big is that market, and is that need continuing or is it changing its pace? The second part is on the other side of a fulcrum, which is really how well do you understand the technology, product, or service that you've created, and how doable or closely available are those solutions to meet the needs or the goals or the problems of those customers. And it's not only for today, but what about the near future and the far future? Will you continue to be valuable to them with your product or service? But the most important fulcrum in between the customer understanding and the technology understanding is really all about the business economics. So what does it take to get that product to market? What does it take to find the largest market that you can so that you're not going just after the early adopters and then there's no mass market behind it, but that you've been able to understand who else is going to take on your product or service. So what I typically find is those 3 things are out of phase with each other, and they should be aligned. No matter whether you're 2 weeks into a startup, a year into a startup, or 2 years into a growth stage company, or whether you're 20 years into a business or 70 years in a family multi-generational business, those 3 things have to be in alignment, but the most important part of it is the people. And if you have an A team, those people should be able to manage those 3 parts very effectively. If you don't have a good team that's nimble and coachable and fresh, then you can have problems moving forward. So that's, as I look at leadership, it's an understanding of being a part of that people team and understanding what the business requires to be successful. And that style emanates, of being able to identify and prioritize your opportunities, set a clear path, and communicate it effectively so that the organization is doing the things that are most positive towards contribution. And most importantly, if it's a mature organization, the most difficult part is stopping people from doing things that they've been doing that may be counter-strategic to what they should be doing.
Great. Hey, David, I'd like to ask you at this point, you talked about the sophisticated communication methodologies that Acrelic uses. And I'd love to get your take on why you think many times, not in every case, but oftentimes engineers and scientists can have difficulty explaining to general audiences, important decision makers, investors, and others, policymakers, in clear, jargon-free terms, the real-world value of their work.
Right. Yeah, I think you hit on a great point that about the value of communications, and it's not just having clear and effective communications about your intents and your vision and your direction that you're heading in, so that people have a clear picture of where you're going. But it's also important that you find ways to motivate them along the way, and that they want to go on the journey with you as you're moving, because, Mark, we all know that change is probably the only constant that we know of outside of taxes, to be certain, right? And so as things change, you want to make sure that people are with you when they're changing, that they're not straggling. And, it's like a herd of cattle. If you let them just go, they'll be spreading out across the plains and they won't be heading in the same direction. And it'll take you a lot longer to go to where you need to go. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that people need to be herded, but hopefully that puts a picture in people's minds. Right. And I'll give you a great example where I learned about the aspect of communications. It's not just driving clarity, but it's more important to drive and validate an understanding and acceptance by all the people and employees that need to go with you. So I mentioned this earlier once, but I worked for a very large engineering organization of 6,000 software engineers that developed software for the telecommunications industry on the operation support system side. And we needed to help that business evolve from being a project-run organization where they were running $50 and $100 million projects from year to year with change requirements and acceptance criteria for just that year, and their bonus was based upon reducing the expenses for that project to a point where they would pay a bonus back by getting a 20 to 30% reduction over the estimate of cost to build that software. And we had to evolve that to a business that was going to be independent and financially driven and run to more common operating characteristics of a commercial company. And again, I've gotten to work for some great people, and Sanjeev Ahuja, my boss, was the president of software, who basically we talked through the issues of how do we get an engineering organization to drive 35% margin out of their business for 2 or 3 years to become a commercial enterprise. Mm-hmm. And what would normally be a business plan approach to get them to create their business plans, forecast out their financials, and manage to their financial outcomes, which are typically lagging indicators of health. We knew we needed something that were going to drive leading indicators to know that we were going to get there sooner, but also be something that would incent the people independently of driving the right behaviors. Mm-hmm. And what we found and what Sanjeev drove was the perspective that the engineers wouldn't respond effectively to just financial targets because they've never been driven by P&L targets in the past, but that they do have a lot of pride in their work and they do have a lot of pride in their engineering and their problem solving. So what we did was we set off to drive the profitability of the business by setting targets to be the most efficient and effective software development organization that could be quantified in the world, which at that time was the Carnegie Mellon Institute, the CMMI level 5 certification, which there were only a dozen companies in the world at the time that were of that highest certification. And what that did was it drove processes for best practices to say, here's how many lines of code that approximately need to be created and how many sections of that lines of code. Here's how many people should be staffing that. So if the best practice was to staff 25, but the original team started with 100, they quickly just figured out how to get the team down to 25 in the same period of time so that they would become best practices that they could get so that they could drive towards that certification. And that whole process drove 35% margin out of that business for 2 years in a row, and then another 25% in the third year.
Really, really interesting.
So,
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So the net of that was that I've learned throughout life is that you have three ways to get people to want to do something. You can incent them through their hearts, minds, or wallets. And here was a perfect example where we worked with them through their hearts and minds, and it helped everyone's wallet, if you will. Mm-hmm. By being more profitable, we could be more effective. We could pay down our debt covenants faster to the company who had just bought us, and therefore be freed up to do more things as an independent entity. So it was a win-win for everyone, and it was just an amazing lesson learned about how to get a large technical organization to drive efficiency and effectiveness out without really driving them by the financial numbers.
Right. And David, I actually would also like to ask you, rather than just assuming that the benefits that were desired here were just financial in nature, it was a more comprehensive, kind of a more holistic look at this. And ultimately, it did have financial benefits, but it wasn't just an assumption straight off the bat that financial
exactly. And Sanjeev had come to this conclusion from his large experience. He was head of software development at IBM for a number of years, and it was just it was great to be a part of that team that was pulling this together.
David is somebody who's so experienced, who's seen so many different challenges, looked at them from different perspectives, figured out how to overcome them. Given where we are right now with the coronavirus and all the associated problems that we are facing, really across sectors, corporate America, nonprofit, government sector, thinking about leaders in those areas, what do you think leaders should be doing right now to confront and we all hope overcome the difficulties that we're facing?
We've all been through, we were just talking about this yesterday, we've all been through a number of other crises, whether it was 9/11, whether it was the financial crisis of 2007, and those crises were things that you dealt with, but it really maybe affected one side of your business, and it affected the world at different times and at different strengths. This pandemic is something that's affected the entire globe and has shifted our way of living, our way of buying products, our way of demanding for things, in addition to our way of delivering and fabricating, and the entire supply chain and people's ability to forecast demand has entirely been thrown up in the air and landing who knows where. And so, the most important things that we've been talking about recently with the companies that I'm the board of, or other C-suite people that I've been talking with, cash is clearly king, and you have to retain it and free it up from wherever you can, and make sure that you've got running room to survive, not only the first wave of the pandemic, but a potential second wave that's coming up. And you have to know whether you're deemed essential or non-essential and what impact that will have to your business. But if there may be creative ways to free up cash by getting rid of old inventory that you're holding on to, that could even get you 20 cents or 30 cents on the dollar, or I've seen metal manufacturing companies that hold on to their molds for 30 years that nobody comes back to buy. But, if you could get scrap value for that, you could free up cash that might give you another month of payroll. The second item would be, don't waste time, don't hesitate. If you have an opportunity to get PPP money or the new program, I forgot what the term is of the new program, but, get that PPP money to help you sustain, because right now, any lines of credit or any credit you've had is suspect and is subject to change and change, unfortunately, at the bank's schedule, not on yours. So your cash lines are going to shrink, and your ability to get through these periods is going to be questionable. And so, can you free up assets or inventory? And the most, I guess, the fourth thing is make sure you're checking all the reports that are coming from your management team, and ensure that nothing of value is being left out or unknown, or again, there may be hidden assets that are sitting in warehouses or distribution points that could be winnowed down to free up cash. Right? Again, I can't stress it more. Cash is king. And I'm a bootstrapper, so when I don't have cash to make payroll for the companies that I've started, it comes out of my back pocket or comes out of my savings account. So I'm always doing everything I can to get the most from our customer revenues and from the cash that we have. The fifth thing is revisit all your agreements and contracts and understand what flexibility do you have to reduce expenses and obligations. Your landlords are putting a lot of pressure on you because they've got mortgages that they've got to retain. But are there opportunities to get out of your lease early? Are there opportunities to reduce the space that you're not using at all, and make sure that you're shutting down your utilities so that you don't have any ongoing expenses while your workers are working from home? So look for other ways like that. But you've got to learn to stretch out the business as long as possible. And so that means even developing 6-month plans if you can't think a year ahead, or develop a year-long plan if you need to understand where your business is going, because again, the demand factors and predictability of most businesses now are different than what they were pre-COVID. And the sixth item or seventh item, I think, is look for unprofitable parts of your business. Maybe there are some parts of your business that could be spun out and could be created as a separate business, or maybe someone else has a better idea about how to get that business from a losing cash flow or EBITDA perspective to a winning business. And so this may be creative ways to free up value from your business if you've acquired businesses that may not be fitting today, but the valuations are really tough today, so you'd have to look at ways to monetize it without having to put in cash into that business. But it may be better run by someone else, or create a value assessment for these spin out opportunities, or figure out a way to turn some of your businesses more into cash cows and let them drive the business. Or maybe they are an essential business, and maybe you can expand your reach today for the products that you're selling because of you're doing something that COVID has made an opportunity for you. So you need to look at both sides of that equation and say, where can you put investments into things that are going to currently be demanded higher than others?
David, at this point, I would like to ask you about Notify, one of the companies in which you're an investor, also a co-founder, of course. Can you tell us more about the market that Notify serves in manufacturing, any new initiatives, its mission, and the vision that you and the other leaders have for Notify at this point?
Sure. Yeah, this is a good one because it's as an angel investor and as an entrepreneur, it's in my sweet spot. So I don't want to make a short story long, but when I sold my last software company in 2012, I looked around and realized that while I've been growing up in tech and tech has been doing great things, that manufacturing had the exact inverted growth curve. And so in New Jersey, where I was living in 1986, there were 115,000 manufacturers in the state of New Jersey. And how many companies do you think there were there about 4 or 5 years ago when I last looked at it, Mark?
Oh, maybe 20,000?
Right. You're close. There were less than 12,000 left of the 115,000. Wow. It's less than 10%. And so that set me off on a course to better understand, because I always look at challenges like that as an opportunity. And I look for ways to identify areas where these factoids that I'm seeing are creating opportunities. So to net it out, I realized I spent time with about 150, 170 manufacturers from New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania to understand what was going on there. And then with my experience in tech, I found a combination of things that drove me to put together an investment thesis around software connected to physical products. And so as a part of that thesis, there's several assumptions. One is that manufacturing is definitely moving closer to demand, as opposed to being close to supply, where you get low-cost labor and low-cost materials. Two, that manufacturing is going through a sea change, very much like computing went through from mainframes to PCs and client server and now back to the cloud. That manufacturing is going through from mass manufacturing to mass customization and personalization, where today you can order a Chrysler car and have 8,000 paint options, while that you can give orders to the factory on your phone for that car. Three, that with the advent of low-cost microprocessors and the formation of what's being called IoT, where you can have dollar microprocessors running anywhere. That could be on a factory floor connecting devices. It could be on a pipeline connecting hundreds of miles of gas pipelines or oil pipelines or energy systems or utility systems, and you can have things that will detect and correlate problems going on so that valves can be closed to make it safe. All these things are happening and coming together to say that software is going to be a driver of physical products, and that's a good space to be in. So that's taken me into areas of manufacturing, advanced manufacturing, smart city technologies, autonomous vehicle technologies, and the application of AI, artificial intelligence, and AR, VR towards different industrial spaces. So as I was looking at manufacturing, I had Bob Wise come to me with a business plan, because I have people as an angel investor. A lot of VCs and other angels will send me something that has software connected to physical products. And so Bob actually came to me with a business plan that I felt bad. I feel like I shredded the business plan. And I said, I said, I'm here. We lived in the same town. So, he came back like 5 months later with his first shell around Notify. And so I started working with them on Notify, and we started trying to work out. The original issue is that manufacturing is very fragmented. So 95% of manufacturers are under 300 employees. 85% of manufacturers in the U.S. are under 100 employees. Wow. So if you think about the types of businesses that would need automation and support, it's not the typical ones that you see from the big equipment players like Siemens and GE and others, they have tremendous overhead staffs and they're much bigger. These are all companies that are living hand to mouth and aren't going to take solutions that require a lot of thinking and a lot of overhead in order to put them in, or a lot of change. These are companies that are all living hand to mouth, being competitive and trying to compete on a global scale with delivering their products to one of the largest demanding countries in the world, which is the US. So with my experience in manufacturing and those areas, it was very clear that the small to mid-sized manufacturers, which were the dominant part of the industry, had much higher accident rates compared to the largest ones. And so we realized that if we could do something for workers who were operating heavy machinery in a factory, that if we reminded them that they were about to operate a very dangerous machine, potentially show them a video of what could happen with that machine if you weren't safe, and then get them to be accountable and responsible that they've got their head in the right space, very much like a captain of a plane, a commercial aircraft, walks around their plane, checks all the things. So as a part of their opening story and opening operational checklist, we incorporate these safety points and we put it on a tablet right there. We can add a lot of value and reduce the accident rates of companies, which will dramatically reduce their out-of-pocket expenses for taking care of the workers that have had accidents in their companies. And it's been an amazing traction time for the company. We started last year in 2019 and built the software, got the tablets. We have 10 pilots in place, and those pilots are now converting from beta pilots to paying customers. And the fact that what we found is some additional value propositions for the manufacturing space that have just been amazing. We've been able to cut out slack time of about 20 to 30 minutes a day, where a machine operator leaves their station, puts their machine on hold, and goes around looking for a material handler to either take the finished parts away or to bring more raw materials to the site. They can just do that from the tablet, request them, and then the material handlers come over and pick up the materials. We've also been able to automate the paper process of what's called the job traveler. So the job traveler is a piece of paper that defines what the input looks like, what the process should go through with that part or material, and then what the output specification should be, as well as the number of parts and the types of finish and the types of material work that has to get done, and potentially a jig that has to be put on the machine to use it. And so our customers are now automating that job traveler, which in the age of COVID is a great thing, because the paper that you send the job traveler around from station 1 to station 2 to station 3 to continue the part process, that paper can transfer, COVID. So now we have an automated way where the tablet stays at their machine, and the next station that gets the product is able to have that process automated. So it's just, we're still at the beginning phases. We're at a growth stage and growth phase, but I think there's tremendous value proposition and there's tremendous acceptance and adoption by its customers.
David, I'd like to take this opportunity to ask you about an organization that you were integral in founding and getting rolling, the Private Directors Association, the chapter in Chicago and the chapter in Boston now, where you are located and where you started up that chapter. What is the Private Directors Association, and what are its goals, and what is it all about?
Oh, great. Thank you, Mark. The Private Directors Association is a unique nonprofit member-driven organization that was founded in Chicago in 2014, really got started 2015, so about 5 years ago. And its focus is unique in that it supports enhancing the value of boards, board directors, and their qualifications for private company owners, as opposed to other organizations like the NACD, which is focused almost exclusively on public company governance. And so the PDA has a unique position in the private space, of which I did a quick research job, and there's 15,800 companies in Massachusetts alone that are private companies between 10 million and $1 billion in size from revenue. So there's a significant amount of companies. Some portion of those companies have developed boards and have realized that developing a private board member or an independent board member is valuable to them, especially if they decide to take on other investments from VCs or private equity companies or ESOPs or family businesses as their partners. It's always important to have an independent board director that doesn't have the bias coming from those investors. And so the PDA helps support its members who are typically coming from family businesses and directorships there, or private equity VC-backed companies, owner, founder-led, or employee-owned, and ESOPs or mutuals and large partnerships. And so the PDA has grown from being Chicago as the main chapter, and then it started Detroit, Nashville, and Charlotte within the first year or two. And now we're up to 16 chapters across the country. And we just exceeded the 900 member mark. Wow. And we'll probably be 1,000 members by year end. As you know, I moved from Chicago, where I joined the PDA and got involved with their great programs. And I moved here to Boston. So as a part of moving here, I volunteered and raised my hand to start the Boston chapter. Mm-hmm. So we started and had our first meeting at the end of January. We had our second real meeting, which started in February. And now we're up to over 40 members in the Boston area. We really cover New England. And we may change our name to New England instead of just Boston. But we have 40 great members who are representative of all the various company business models, and most of them have had board positions, or they've been C-suite executives, or they've been investors or owners in private companies. So it's a very collegial organization, and that's one of the things that I loved about the atmosphere that the PDA started in Chicago, where it's a very pay-it-forward, collegial atmosphere where everyone is there to help each other. And so every program that was held in person in Chicago always had a great hour of good cocktails or beverages or wine and good food. And I never saw anyone standing alone during that networking hour. Mm-hmm. I'm going to take a break here for a second. I don't know if you heard, but somebody just started. I think that they instilled so that during a networking hour where you've got good cocktails and good food. I mean, I've never turned down good food or cocktails before, but it was very interesting that I would observe people that were standing alone, and they wouldn't be left alone for too long. Mm-hmm. You're also going to be in an environment where you're expanding your network. You're learning things, you're testing your concepts out, and you're being able to test it with your peers who can give you great feedback before you put it into practice as a board best practice or as a C-suite practice. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the unique nature. So, as we build up the Boston chapter here, that's actually being ingrained into our principles because we want to make sure that we replicate that culture. And I'm not sure whether it's the culture of the Midwest or whether it's the culture of the founders. Uh-huh. I believe it's actually a mixture of both.
That's
really a little bit of both.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's been great. So right now we've put on since February we put on 3 programs. We've done it all virtually, but we know that there's 4 goals that our members have. One is that they want to find a board opportunity. 2 is that they want to expand their network with people who are peers and involved in private company business. 3, they want to educate and they want to learn more about private company governance and board issues and leadership in private companies. And the 4th is that they want to give back. And that give back comes in the form of helping other people, to being able to speak and share thought leadership opportunities as a panelist or a speaker or as a moderator. But also, I feel like the PDA is an organization, unlike others, where you can go through the directory, call somebody, and 90% of the time, if you mention you're a PDA member, they'll take your call and they'll pay it forward with you. And I think that's an unusual situation. And so our goal here is to bring on board directors, owners, and C-suite executives from the private companies here in New England. And I think we've gone from 0 to 40 in just a couple of months, even during the pandemic. And we're really starting to pick up a good pace, and we're going to keep the programming up. And we're also doing things to network where we're holding happy hours where our own members can meet our members. And we're going to be holding happy hours with other chapters so that the chapters can meet each other. And so you're meeting, again, people with a common interest and an affinity for the same thing. We're expanding their network and we're hitting all their goals that they have for being a PDA member.
David, as we wrap up, and this has been just a wonderful conversation, thank you so much for that. And, the PDA is an exciting initiative that you've launched in New England, and this culture of helpfulness that you described pervading the organization, I think we all want to operate in such a positive, helpful culture. As we wrap up, like I said, you're an experienced leader. You've learned lessons. You've been on the ground. You've been an executive and a founder and looked at organizations from all different angles. And I wonder, as an experienced leader, if there are techniques, strategies, approaches, attitudes that you have developed during the time as you've developed during your tenure in different leadership roles, things like that you feel could benefit someone who is just starting out in their career and aspires to one in which they are a leader, for example. So, I talk to a lot of potential startups. I talk to them early stage, and I get involved with students. I've been involved at Kellogg and their engineering school with students taking a concept and trying to commercialize it. I'll tell you, I think the most important thing is to understand that those 4 pillars that I mentioned earlier, the people, the customer knowledge and intimacy, the product and service definition and doability and viability, balanced by the business economics in between those 3 things, is really important for any startup. And you can take a business plan canvas, and in an hour, you can use that business plan canvas to describe the business that you're thinking about starting up. And you can start getting other people to validate your assumptions about that. And that's a great way to get started. But again, when I look at a lot of startups, there's always a bias. It's usually a technology group that doesn't want to talk to customers because they're too busy developing the product. Or it's a bunch of people who understand consumer marketing or B2B marketing and sales who have no clue that the technology is still 5 years away from viability at the economic level they want to deliver. And so these 3 things need to be alignment from day one. In addition to, there's one other important aspect. As
angel investor, and I've worked as a venture capitalist before, and I've done a lot of acquisitions and looked at thousands of companies for acquisition. It's really clear that startups are made by a group of people and very rarely made by an individual. Mm-hmm. And so most investors won't invest in single founder businesses for a variety of reasons. First, it's about the gestalt of the team, that when you have three founders, 1 and 1 plus 1 equals 10. When you have one founder, the second problem is you've got vulnerability of the single owner being at risk. They get hit by a bus, they get run over by a moped, or they get whatever. You're putting the whole business at risk. So most investors, whether they're angels or VCs or institutional PE firms, won't invest in single founder led. So I think it's helpful to see if you can partner up, and especially partner up around the three functional pillars that I talked about earlier. Somebody that, if you're on the technology side, somebody that understands the customers really well and how to get to the market, or and somebody else who might understand the business economics and the difference in cost of a prototype versus an engineering prototype, which really tells you what your cost of goods sold is going to be like, is a completely larger gap than getting from a concept to a prototype. And so getting through all those stages requires nimbleness, and it really, the best thing is to have an A team, and that A team should be coachable, that those founders should be, not listening to everyone, because it's funny. In most situations, there's a lot of mentors who want to give back and who want to help entrepreneurs and startups get off the ground. And I think one of the greatest challenges that I've seen for those entrepreneurs and founders is not knowing how to filter out what they're hearing from the various mentors that they have giving them their advice. Right. And so they end up trying to appease them all. They'll die, because many of them are polar opposites in their advice, because it depends upon something else that wasn't considered. So it's really important that you learn how to value input coming in, but validate it against the focus that you're heading in, and the direction that you're heading in, and take the best of what you're hearing and filter out the rest. I think, if you have a well thought out customer perspective on the value and the size of the market, and focus in on your product customer fit, and you have a very clear understanding of what it takes to get to market, your value and your ability to raise capital or to raise customers goes up dramatically.
I really liked how you talked about, not having enough time to really validate with the customer because you are building out the product. And, it just reminds me of something I talk a lot about in my work, which is the need really to connect before you communicate, and not viewing those two activities as separate and sequential. Really, being with your customer is going to help you understand how the customer, uses, what the customer needs, all things that really are going to inform and make more efficient the development process. Just like connecting before you communicate is going to make your communication on target and probably allow you to get to the messaging part of this much quicker, because you're going to understand what moves your customer, your stakeholder, as a result of you doing that upfront connection piece.
Mark, I'm not an engineer, but my mind works in very physical ways to think about things. And so Start Playdate was basically a ball that you can play with your dog remotely from any location. It's a great productivity gainer in the office to play with your dog while they're at home. But it's got a camera, microphone, and speaker built in. And so the development team that founded it pre-sold it on Indiegogo. It was one of the highest sold products for pets on Indiegogo. And at the beginning, one of my partners and I, who invested in the business, basically suggested that they focus on the physical aspects and just do some stress testing, because if you have a Great Dane chomping down on this 5-inch ball, that could put a lot of pressure. And so while you're working on the cool and interesting stuff like the camera technology and the software and the tablet software, you need to think about the physical things. Right. Well, the development team had a bias towards developing the software and technology first, and so what happened was just a long story short, the plastic that they first developed, after they were done developing the electronics and firmware and the molds for the pieces, the plastic couldn't see through. So how do you have a camera working inside of something you can't see through? Then the plastic was too brittle. And then because of bad timing around Chinese New Year's, and then bad timing around the fact that their supplier had their production facility taken over by their best customer for 8 months, it came out with a 2-year delay based upon leaving these physical issues of stress testing to the last minute, as opposed to realizing that was an important part of the critical path to get your product to market. And so I'm not trying to point fingers, but I'm just saying these are the things that happen and require nimbleness and require an understanding of priorities. And sometimes you don't do that when you're in a startup, because you fired and then you're going to aim.
Right. David, this has been such a fantastic discussion, and I know our listeners really benefit from your broad experience across industries, various leadership roles, looking at businesses from various levels, various perspectives, and really bring it all together into principles and approaches that can benefit anyone who is trying to make an organization perform better. This has just been a fantastic opportunity, and again, I really thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to join us.
Well, thank you, Mark. I really have enjoyed getting to know you, and I really think that what you're working on is critically important, because I'm kind of a technical person, but not an engineer, and I think communications and establishing better pragmatic perspectives is really important to technical people, because it's really the backbone of anything we do. It's just a matter of the balance with the understanding of the market and the business economics where success comes from. And I think you're doing a great job to share that with your audience. So thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed this day.
Great. And thanks for those kind words, David. And listeners, thank you so much for being here on this episode of When Science Speaks. And I hope you'll be back next time for the next episode of When Science Speaks.
This is When Science Speaks, a new web series profiling innovative and interesting people working in science and technical fields, from academia to industry to the nonprofit world. We explore how to be a powerhouse advocate for science and your research, how to advance your career in meaningful ways that make you happy, and how to push back on the ongoing assault on science and other related issues of interest happening in the world.